Hello everyone, Aaron here. Thanks for watching. This is the Lost in Dixie YouTube channel. I actually started this channel about 2 years ago with a plan to put up weekly and bi-weekly content, and I was just really slow to get my equipment together, and a month turned into a year, and so now I'm starting the channel back up, and I figured this video would be as good as any to start with. I wanted to make this video to unpack a situation I was involved in last weekend on Twitter. Now, if you are not on Twitter or you're living under a rock, you're aware of the hashtag resistcapitalism that started being used again last week. I think it had about 200,000 tweets over the weekend, and this obviously interested me because I'm an anti-capitalist. I was perusing through the text, responding here and there. Most of the tweets were actually negative toward the hashtag, which isn't surprising since most people are capitalist. And I was perusing through there, and I came across a tweet from someone I follow by the name of Sargon of Akkad. Now, Sargon is what you would call a big deal on the internet. I mean, he's got 50,000 or Twitter followers and 250,000 YouTube subscribers, of which I'm one. And actually, because I like his stuff for the most part, I think that it's pretty interesting, and I do think that he kind of harps on the feminist and anti-social justice thing way too much. I think that's been done to death, but overall I like his content. That's why I follow him. But he posted something, and he actually put it in his Weak and Stupid video that he does every Sunday. He actually commented on the hashtag, and I think before I started recording this, that had been up to about 184,000 views. So it gets out to a lot of people. Unfortunately, he didn't really spend much time on it. He basically just called people stupid and then made a couple of bad arguments and then moved on. But one of the things that he did on Twitter and in his video was he posted this graph, and the graph was supposed to represent all the deaths in the 20th century and who they could be attributed to. I don't know where this graph comes from. It attributes deaths to individualism and capitalism, as well as political systems in Germany, and it just didn't make a lot of sense. But the thing that stuck out to me, besides the fact it kind of goes back and forth between communism and Marxism, which are two different things, and the information is just not accurate, the biggest thing that stood out was the fact that it attributed no deaths to capitalism. I think you'd have to be pretty naive, even as a supporter of capitalism, to think that no one has died from it. I mean, just take healthcare in the United States. If I'm a healthcare provider and I work for profit, and you're a customer who needs healthcare but you don't have any money, I'm not going to give you healthcare, and you're going to die. Tens of thousands of people die that way in the United States every year, and we're the richest country in the world. So I simply tweeted to Sargon, hey, I don't know where you got this bullshit graph, but about 20 million people die from capitalism every year. As you would expect, he asked me to back that up, which I did. Eventually I found the study and posted it to his Twitter. The study I'll go into in just a second, but the point of this video is that between the time that I tweeted him the first time and the second time, I actually gave him the study twice. The second time that I gave him that, I stopped engaging with his followers. They pretty much lit me up with a torrent of text, tweets. And I don't have a lot of traffic on Twitter. I think I have about 30 followers right now. So I don't get that much engagement on Twitter, so it was more than I could actually handle. I tried to engage with his followers, but for every tweet I would send, I would get 10 more right back. So the point of this video is actually to kind of tackle the majority of the arguments I kept hearing over and over again from Sargon's followers, because I wasn't able to do it on Twitter. Now, the study that I gave Sargon, which he never commented on Twitter or in his video last week, I'm assuming either because he didn't read it or because he didn't want to show support against his idea. You can criticize that study. It is old, 4 years old this year. but there hasn't really been any substantive studies one way or the other since then. I would have to imagine that's probably because corporations don't want people to know how many people die because of capitalism. In that study, they actually estimate 18 million, and I think it's a conservative adjustment with population increase to move that up to 20 million, even though it's probably more like 25 to 30 million by now, but 20 million gets the job done. So I want to go into the arguments that I heard from Sargon's followers real quick. First, I want to dispense with the silliest argument. This is one of the two arguments Sargon actually made in his his Weak and Stupid video, and it was one that gets repeated over and over again, and it's somehow the notion that if you own an iPhone or drink Starbucks, specifically those two things, you are no longer qualified or allowed to critique or be critical of capitalism. This is obviously the most absurd thing that I've ever heard. People don't have the choice to live in a capitalist society, or at least they don't choose to be born into one. I didn't have any choice but to be born into a capitalist society, and for the majority of my life I've gone to work, been given a fraction of what I actually produce, the rest of it goes in someone else's pocket. I make them rich. I think the least I deserve is an iPhone and a cup of coffee. This is one of those arguments people make because it's convenient, it's easy, and it's really lazy when you think about it. But no, playing by the rules that you're forced to play by and getting the rewards for playing by those rules, there's nothing wrong with that. You can play by a set of rules and still want to change them. So everybody just stop making that argument. It's really dumb and it's really lazy. That being said, people on the left, if you subscribe to this channel and you continue to watch it in the future, the majority of what I'm going to do is actually going to be bashing the left for poor arguments and for generally being weak and sucking. Stop saying that socialism created the iPhone. Socialism did not create the iPhone. Yes, some of the technology was funded by government programs, but that is not what socialism is. You're actually misarguing what socialism is on behalf of the right wing. Stop doing that. Socialism is a mode of production, okay? And just because government funds something does not mean it's socialist. So just stop. The second argument that people commonly make, or commonly made, and it was one of the other arguments, the second most common argument that I heard from Sargon's followers, and it was actually one of the only two arguments he made in his video, was that Marxism has killed more people than capitalism. This is not correct. Obviously, with the study that I provided, over 800 million have died in the last 40 years from capitalism. But the problem with this notion is, first of all, the mixing of Marxism and communism and switching back and forth. People feel entitled to do this with all left-wing ideologies. I don't know why, but it's really inaccurate. Marxism is a broad political theory, and communism is an actual governmental setup. So to just go back and forth between the two is dishonest. So I'm going to assume all these people mean communist, and that they're lumping the USSR, China under Mao, Pol Pot, and all the South American regimes together into one. Even still, the problem you're facing with that argument is there's nothing in Marxism that dictates you have to kill people. It's like a Christian telling an atheist, well, Stalin and Mao were atheists and they killed a lot of people, so atheism is obviously bad because some atheists did some bad stuff. It's the same thing for communism. Okay? Being a communist and then you kill people is not the same as saying you're a communist, therefore you kill people. There's nothing in a Marxist or communist structure that requires gulags, forced labor camps, or political assassinations. Those were bad people running communist states, and the bad things they did were separate from the communism. On the other hand, there are structural problems with capitalism itself that kills you. If you're blindly pursuing profit, you're going to create externalities. For instance, Goldman Sachs goes and buys wheat futures and raises the cost of wheat and then a village in the Sudan can no longer afford it, and then they starve to death. That is a direct structural example of capitalism killing people. Or if a mine in Virginia, a mining company, cuts corners on safety, and then a mine shaft collapses on their workers because they wanted higher profit margins, that's a direct externality. You don't necessarily, you can find those in communism, but the deaths that have been attributed to communism are not because of that. It's because they're psychopaths running communist countries. The third argument that I hear a lot is that communism is, third argument that I hear a lot is that capitalism is the best system objectively. I love it when people try to pin objective rights or wrongs where they don't apply. Every political ideology, what is going to be the best one, is based on your values and what you care about. If you care about, producing profit at all costs, whether it hurts the environment or exploits workers or results in on-the-job deaths, then you're probably a capitalist. If you care about democracy in the workplace and freedom of workers, then you're probably not going to be a capitalist. So the argument that it's an object because it creates more profit or because it does this or that is all about your value system. So if it's your value system that makes capitalism best, that's great. It doesn't fucking apply to me or to anybody else if they don't want it to. The fourth most common argument that I hear in favor of capitalism is that capitalism is better than all the systems we've tried before it. To that I say no shit. We've spent 5,000 years before capitalism doing monarchy, slavery, and feudalism, which is basically slavery. It's not a very high bar to pass. The fifth most common argument that I hear in favor of capitalism is that, fourth. The fourth most common argument in favor of capitalism is that capitalism is better than all the systems we've tried before, therefore we should just stop progressing. Of course capitalism is better than everything we've done before. Before capitalism, all we had was 5,000 years of monarchy, slavery, and feudalism. It's not a very high bar to pass. Having a system, where people are free as opposed to ones where they're not free. Slavery, obviously, systematic rape, torture, and murder of people who are owned as property. Yeah, it's slightly better than that. That's not, it's not very hard to do. And the question shouldn't be, is capitalism the best we've ever done? It should be, is capitalism the best we can ever do? And I don't think it is, and I think that the burden is on the capitalists to prove that there's no improvements to be made there. Side note, the first 100 years of capitalism were actually built off the backs of slaves, so it's not actually a ringing endorsement for your ideology if you think that it's like a benefit for the little guy. Side note, the first 100 years of capitalism were actually built off the backs of slaves, and that's not actually a ringing endorsement for it being beneficial to the little guy. The fifth most common argument I hear in favor is that, number 5 is probably the most common argument amongst people who are trying to be amicable in this discussion with people who are not capitalists, and they say, well, you're probably against corporatism, not actually capitalism. Corporatism being a system in which small groups of businesses, cartels, corporate boards, that they actually corrupt the state in order to create an unfair advantage for them in the market by giving money to politicians. Obviously I am against that system. The disagreement I have is that that is some perversion of capitalism as opposed to a stage of capitalism. I mean, think about it for a second. The only rule in capitalism is to make money and profit by any means necessary, right? So say I start a company and you start the same kind of company, and I work harder and I innovate and I beat you and I make money, right? That's the way it's supposed to work. The problem is I want to keep making money, all right? And continuing to innovate and continuing to compete actually sucks. So why wouldn't I throw some money to a politician to create regulations that keep me in business or make me have a monopoly? Of course I would do that. That's the way it happened before we had anti-monopoly laws. Corporations got big and powerful, they bought off politicians, and then they were able to secure themselves. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. If all I care about is making profit, why wouldn't I do that? And people make the silly argument, well, if you reduce the size of the state, then there won't be anything to corrupt. Okay, unless you get rid of the state completely, it's always going to be able to be corrupted. You could reduce it down to 10 people, and those 10 people decide how they operate, and they're still able to make rules in favor of businesses. So the size of a state has nothing to do with it. But on a side note, while I am against corporatism, as these people say, I'm also against capitalism. Okay, I am for democracy and work, and I'm against the private ownership of the means of production. Okay, I don't support wage labor in a system where the workers don't have any control over that division, and I'm not for unlimited property rights. I don't have a problem with you owning a piece of property in a home, but I don't want you to own the entire country. I read several years back, Ted Turner, his goal was to be able to ride his horse from Canada to Mexico without touching anybody else's land. I don't know if he ever accomplished that, but under the rules of capitalism, he could have. He could have owned an entire swath of our nation. And I often ask people who are pro-capitalist, do you support someone owning the entire planet and making you a feudal slave? And they almost always say no. And I reply, well, then you're not a real capitalist, because unlimited property rights are a definite fundamental part of capitalism. Number 6 is probably my favorite argument people make in favor of capitalism, and that is, if capitalism is so bad, why is the entire world capitalist? This shows how uninformed people are. You can never discount people's desire to delude themselves. The reason capitalism is spread all over the world is because of military force. In America, there's a gentleman who was named Smedley Butler. He was a major general in the United States Marine Corps, one of the most decorated officers in U.S. military history. He was the recipient of many awards, including the Congressional Medal of Honor. For those of you in Europe who don't know what that is, that's the highest honor that you can get in the military. And at one point, they actually only gave one to each branch of government per war. Obviously, we can't do that anymore because our wars are too fucking long, but he got one. He was a major badass. And he wrote a book in the last century called War is a Racket. He wasn't trying to be clever. He really meant war is a racket. And in that book, General Butler goes through and displays how his entire military career was simply fighting on behalf of corporate interest and going into nations and forcing them to be capitalists. And in fact, the 20th century is littered with democratically elected, non-capitalist leaders being corrupted through bribes, overthrown through military coups, or outright assassinated by the U.S. government, the CIA, and by Western states. Even look at what's happening now. Greece, in Syriza, they tried to pass a far-left party to free them from the austerity enforced on them by Northern Europe, and Germany just whips them into shape and actually makes things worse. In Venezuela, the post-Chavez regimes tried to carry on his non-capitalist nationalizations, and what happens? Capitalist institutions interfere with that. And I always ask people, what does it say about your ideology that the poor and working people of the world have to be forced to embrace it? Something to think about. But those are the 6 most common arguments I was getting from Sargon's followers. I think that they're all pretty well argued against. You guys can let me know what you think. if you like this content and you like talking about these types of things, be sure to subscribe to the channel. I'm planning on doing a 1-hour podcast weekly, but I'm going to film it and I'll break it up into topics and put it on the channel. I do want to have a Q&A section of that podcast, so if you'd like to participate in that, you can put a question in the comment section here. You can email me directly at lostindixie.tv@gmail.com, or you can just tweet me at lostindixie. So let me know what you guys think. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you later.